Good morning. It's good to be starting a new series with you, and I have been really excited to come to this day where we're starting a series I've been thinking about for a long time. And if you know, and you were with us throughout Advent, throughout the Christmas season, we come to celebrate this great and powerful truth that because of Jesus Christ, we can now have full communion with God. We can know the fullness of relationship that He intended because Christ has made a way and Christ has come, Emmanuel, with us. And what better way to think about 2017 than to actually get busy doing that work of communion with God, to make ourselves available to God. A lot of times people think about this time of year, beginning of 2017, January, they think about resolutions they want to make. Some folks think, I want to lose a few pounds, or I want to get in better shape, or I want to sing with my hands in the air, right? Whatever it may be that you've thought of, I wonder how many of us maybe have thought about resolutions for our spiritual lives. And I want to invite you to join me in a resolution to deepen your prayer life in the next 7 weeks and hopefully on into the year. And I don't want you to have to say yes to that just yet. I have to earn the right to ask that question of you today. But a little bit later, I'm going to ask you if you'll join me in a resolution to deepen my prayer life. How is your prayer life these days? How is communion with God these days in your life and in your heart? There are a lot of traps about prayer that we can fall into as believers. Traps that make it difficult to develop routines. Some are practical traps. Some are theological traps. Some are traps based on lies, like the horrible lie that God doesn't hear our prayers. But no matter what the trap is, one thing is certain. The evil one will do whatever possible to keep you and me from drawing power and strength from God. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to spend the next 7 weeks kickstarting our collective prayer lives. And can you think of anything more important for your soul in 2017? Can you? I'd love to hear it if you can. Then to re-energize your faith walk and to see God at work in your life and in this community. So we're going to call this next 7 weeks 7 for 7. 7 minutes a day, offering 7 prayers for a total of 7 weeks. And whether you already have a prayer routine, which I know many of us do, or you need to get back into a spiritual rhythm, which I know many of us do, I think that we can all agree that 7 minutes isn't too much to ask. Do you agree with that? 7 minutes isn't too much to ask. And the great thing is that we get to do it together, okay? So, like I said, I'm going to ask you if you're in and if you'll commit to this next 7 weeks, but don't answer just yet, okay? Open your Bibles with me to Exodus chapter 17, verse 11. Over the first 4 weeks of this series, we're going to look at some Old Testament stories and narratives that are just beautiful, beautiful images for us. And I need to set up the scene that we're in today. Okay, it'll be helpful to have your Bible in front of you or the Pew Bible, so open it with me to Exodus chapter 17, verse 11. Here's what's happening in our passage. I'm going to get into this quickly. In our passage, we're landing squarely into the middle of a battle scene. The Israelites are going to be attacked by the Amalekites. And Moses sees this enemy storming over a hill, swords drawn, archers ready to darken the sky with their arrows. And he's thinking to himself, oh no, we're being invaded out here in the desert. This is going to be a massacre. Surrounding him is his family, and then there are the tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people that are under his leadership. And they can all be dead. They could all be dead by sundown. And Moses knows his soldiers aren't ready for this kind of battle, but he has no time to spare, so he turns to 3 men, 3 guys that he trusts, and he gives them orders. First, Joshua, you sound the battle cry. Round up as many soldiers as you can, head out to meet the enemy. You don't want to do battle in the camps. You want your army to head out and meet the invading army. And so young Joshua takes off. He's young, he runs, maybe he has the enthusiasm of youth. But Moses knows they're in real trouble. Now, at this point in time in his life, Moses is 80 years old. And he turns to his brother who is 83 years old, Aaron. And then he asks her to join them, who's even older, their brother-in-law. And he says this, now we need to go do what we need to do. So these three guys, they go and climb a mountain hill, nearby hill. And do you remember what they did? Did they direct the battle from there? No. Did they throw rocks at the enemy from that position? No. Did they make a run for it? No. They did what 2-year-olds do when they're standing next to their parent and something makes them feel vulnerable. They put their hands up and they looked to God for help because they knew they were in real trouble. They did what my son Peter did when he was just a little boy. One time we were at the YMCA and we were going to do the swim lessons there when we were members at the Y. And Peter was 2 years old, and him and his brother were always roughhousing. And I had to hold his hand. And at one point he yanks his hand away and he gives me that look like, what do you think, I'm a baby? And inadvertently, when he's horsing around with his brother, he falls into the pool. And I'll never forget it. It was just a second because I was right there. But I turned to the splash, and there he is. Water's over his head because he wasn't tall enough for that part of the pool. And I can just see these big eyes staring up at me, and then his hands shoot up. What else was he going to do? And I grab his arms and I pull him up, and he's in my arms. What did Moses and Aaron and Hur do when they were in over their head? They instinctively did what all little kids do, what we do when we need help. They shot their hands in the air. And they began to pray. Moses sees what's about to go down, and he's spiritually wise enough to know that the best way he can help Joseph and his army to protect his people is to stand on top of that hill and to put his hands up in the air like a 2-year-old and just pray, God, help us. God, help me. We need your supernatural help or we're done. Now, before I read our passage and what happens next, I want to remind us of something that Pastor Taylor mentioned at the front end of the service. Something that we often forget or we sometimes take for granted. It may well be the greatest privilege given to us as human beings. You want to know what it is? It's that there is an open invitation to turn to God, to turn to the Creator, the Master of the universe, to turn to God in any circumstance of our lives and ask for help. Now, people, including myself, have endless ways of making prayer very complicated and to just, make it really hard, this whole prayer business, and make it a burden. I've even done it myself. I've even at times in my life gotten tied up in philosophical and theological knots so badly that I struggled to pray. That's the honest truth. Maybe I need to, hand in my pastor badge. But I think, being honest, this is a struggle that all of us can identify with at some time or another. When Jesus was with us, he said to people like you and me, he said to people who needed help, he said, you ought to pray more. You ought to pray more. You ought to seek God. You ought to ask God. You ought to knock on God's door. Because he's going to hear you. You ought to seek and ask and knock. Because God answers prayer. And he's going to meet you there. How many battles in this sanctuary right now are we trying to shoulder? How many battles in this room are we trying to shoulder on human strength alone? And friends, I can tell you, you and I were not designed, we were not created to shoulder this life alone. You and I weren't designed to be able to do that. And as I look at 2017 and all the challenges and all the temptation, I think it's time to ratchet up our asking and seeking and knocking. What say you? Yeah. I think we should ratchet it up. Because we've got help to come. God is the God of help. We've got some practical help that we're going to be sharing throughout this series and some things I want to share with you today. But first, let's go to this passage, this hilltop with Moses. Joshua is already engaged in the battle against this overwhelming army. And in verse 11, it says this: "As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning." Isn't this fascinating? I wonder when they made the correlation, right? Was it during the first coffee break? Like Moses is putting the creamer in and going, wait a second. It seems like we're getting pushed back. And then all of a sudden he goes back to praying, and then the battle moves forward. And at what point do they figure out that the winning and losing is dependent on the placement of Moses' hands? When do they make that correlation? I wonder, was it a conversation? Was it a spiritual insight? Whatever it may have been, Moses sees that when his hands are up, the Israelites prevail, and when his hands drop to his sides, the enemy starts to prevail. Man, I just love this image. In fact, I pray for you that this image would outlast anything that we say today, even in this series, but this image would outlast and would stick with us. And it would stick with us over the course of the next 6 weeks. Will you listen with your full attention for just this next sentence? Because if you grasp anything else, it's going to be this. It's this sentiment. Grasp this if you grasp nothing else today. On so many levels, the tide of your life's battles hinges on the location of your hands. On so many levels, the tide of your life's battles, and your life's battles, your struggles, your challenges, it hinges on the location of your hands. You may think that the way you experience life on a day-to-day basis couldn't possibly be affected by the location of your hands, but I'm here to tell you that it does, because I can tell you about times in my life where my hands were raised to God like a 2-year-old's. And as I look back on my prayer journal, I did this with our staff in December and just talked about some of my prayers for UPC. Some of them were 16 years old. And I look back on them and I realize, and I just marvel that when I asked God for help, and I raised my hands and believed that God was with me and that He wanted to be intimately drawn towards me and He was going to shoulder the burden that I felt like I couldn't carry myself, that He helped me. He didn't take away the challenges or the troubles or the trials, but God helped me. Can you remember a time like that in your life? Can you remember a time in your life where you depended on God and your prayer life showed evidence of God's help coming to your aid? Maybe it was an interview or a work situation, a project. Maybe it was for some of us that do certain kinds of work. Maybe it's a classroom. Maybe it's a construction site. Maybe it's a courtroom. But God met you in your time of need. Or maybe you're a stay-at-home parent and you've got these kids and you're like, oh, God, help me. I'm a goner. If I don't get your help right now, I'm going to lose it, right? How many of us felt that at some point or another? But then, those times where God helps us, then there are times on the flip side when I tried to shoulder things on my own, with my hands down low. And prayer became stale, and it became tired, and it became full of doubt. And is it any surprise that with my hands down at my sides, God felt distant? Which begs the question, why would we ever drop our hands if we knew that the outcome of life's battles and challenges were that if we raised our hands, God would help? Why would we ever drop our hands then? Well, the answer is in the next part of this story. Verse 12 speaks directly to this. Read this with me. It says, when Moses' hands grew tired. Let me stop there for just a moment. When Moses' hands grew tired. Even though the battle churned when his hands were raised, Moses was human and his hands grew tired. Every honest follower of Jesus that I have ever known has been honest about prayerless seasons in their lives. And it isn't because they lost faith. It isn't because they abandoned the goodness of God or stopped believing in that. They just got tired. Anybody in this room identify with that? Just get tired. But look what happens next. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And I love this. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other. This is a second image, a beautiful image. I want you to carry with you in your mind. It's a beautiful one. The first, of course, is just Moses' hands up in the air like a 2-year-old. And the second is this one. It's 80-year-old Moses with his hands tired and his 2 brothers holding up his 2 arms because he could no longer hold them up. It's such a precious image. Take a look at this. That's a battle right there. That's a battle. Such a precious image of Aaron and Hur holding up their brother's arms and giving him strength when he had none. And they're saying, we know you're running out of steam. We're going to hold you up. You're not in this alone. And we'll stay here as long as you do. What a picture. I want to keep that up on the screen for just a moment. But do you remember when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane? He was shouldering the weight of the world's sin and what he was about to endure in the cross. And so his arms started to go down. Even Jesus, his arms started to go down. So when he went off to the side to pray, what did he do? Do you remember? He asked Peter and James and John to come and join him and to offer support in prayer. Friends, never forget this. Life's battles and big prayer burdens often require arm bearers. People who can hold up arms. Ask anyone here who's battled cancer and they'll tell you. Ask anyone here who's lost a spouse, they'll tell you. Ask anyone here who's lost a child and they'll tell you. Which is why we have to care for one another in our community. This is why we take prayer here very seriously. It's why we pray for one another when we experience loss or when we welcome the joys of new birth, knowing what is to come. And I got to tell you, when you feel the Aarons and the Hurs holding up your arms, when you experience some of their faith transferring to your faith, it's a gift. And it's Christian community at its best. I love that image. So here's the question for you. Is this image a reality in your life these days? This one right here. Do you have a couple of Aarons and Hurs that you can call on? Or are you going solo? Are you a Han Solo, I like to say? Shouldering things alone, maybe even shouldering things alone and without God. In a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about vulnerability as a crucial aspect of prayer. Do you need to allow some folks to know your burdens? This is why at UPC we're so big on small groups. We're so big on sharing life together because we know we can't do it alone. And then there's the flip side. It's one thing to be vulnerable and to say, I need help. I need someone to raise up my hands and to support me. But the flip side is, do you know a Moses whose arms are aching? Do you know someone who's carrying a heavy burden right now? Someone you can just say to, I'm going to hold your arms up. I'm going to pray for you and with you. I'm going to pray for the tide of your marriage and the battle that you're fighting there. I'm going to hold your hands up. I'm going to pray for you and hold your hands up in the battle of addiction that you're facing today. I'm going to hold your arms up and encourage you and pray for you as you seek out a new career or you're fighting a disease, asking God to help your health condition to change, whatever it may be. I love that. Of what does it mean to not only be a Moses to receive the support of others, but then to be Aaron and Hur and to raise the hands of another. Exodus 17, here's 12 and 13, says, Aaron and Hur steadied Moses' arms till sunset. And then these glorious words, and Joshua overcame the enemy. God wins. We win. Joshua overcame the enemy. They'd been at it all day. Moses, his arms are aching. It's like that Survivor challenge, right? And he went all day. And Aaron and Hur helped his arms up, and the sun is setting in the background of the scene, and God helped them. They're exhausted, but they are exhilarated. And I want to say it one last time. It's because the tide of your life's battles hinge on the location of your hands. That short distance between, I'm going to do it myself, versus, I need your help, God. Where are your hands, friends, today? Where are your hands? Are they at your sides? Are they up high? Are they maybe somewhere in between? You're kind of vacillating, maybe haven't found some good rhythms. Some of you are veteran Jesus people, Jesus followers. You've lived most of your life with your hands raised. You have a lot to teach others. And maybe this series is just going to give you some inspiration and give some gasoline and some fire to those habits and those routines you've already had. But some of you, maybe you've had your hands at your sides. And you can't figure out why the tide of the battle that's happening in your life hasn't been going your way. It's been going the wrong way for a long time. And I'm going to encourage you to raise them up and ask for help, starting today. 7 for 7. If I understand correctly, you have a 7 for 7 card that you were given. Can you reach and grab that in your bulletin today? Someone hold it up for me. Yeah. You can wave it. Okay. Yeah. The choir's feeling it today. Look at that. Again, love it. Yeah. This is what I want you to do. I want you to think of two things just today, okay? And then we're going to give some opportunity in a few minutes for you to reflect on this. I want you just to consider today, what is it that you need God's help in? Because He tells us, Jesus tells us to seek and ask and knock, and God will answer. What is it you need God's help in, okay? And reflect on that. And then the second thing is who is someone in your sphere of influence in your life that needs your help, that needs your prayers to hold their arms up, that needs some encouragement and needs the Lord to help them, to be helped and to help. The prayers of intercession, those are just an inspiration today. But over the course of this next week, what I want you to do, and maybe the course of today, is to take some time and reflect on what is it that God would put on your heart to be praying for just the next 7 days. We're going to retool this every week, give some new inspiration and help. But what are 7 prayers that you can pray? This is a 7-week series, and I'm asking for a commitment for all 7 weeks. Because I don't think there's anything more important you could do, you could commit yourself to, than 7 prayers. 7 minutes a day for 7 weeks. Are you in? Okay, let us pray. Lord, I ask for protection and boldness. Protection for this holy pursuit to make you the center, to recenter our lives, even if it's just 7 minutes a day, Lord, to make that a priority for us, and that we can put our hands in the air and cry for help like a 2-year-old. Lord, would you help us? Would you give strength and encouragement and new insights to those of us who've maybe gotten away from some prayer routines and we need to come back? For others, would you give inspiration, Lord? Maybe new insights, maybe to give new flavor in life to our prayer time. And that we would see and recognize that you're meeting us in our prayers. And that like Moses and Aaron and Hur, we can look back and see your hand at work in the battles of our lives. So Lord, I ask, help us. Would you come and be our help today and in the next 7 weeks? And I pray this in your name. And everyone said, amen, amen.